as all of you know, right, that television is where most of our money goes in politics, whether in advocacy or in traditional campaigns. And making sure that as these new tools are developing, which allow much more precise targeting, that we are moving beyond sort of the clumsy old model of broadcast into a much more sophisticated model of communications is really the goal of NPI and the New Politics Institute. So the basic premise of this presentation is that, when we think of TV and we think of, in advocacy and politics, we can no longer think of TV and video just being this old screen, but you need to think of it as something very different. That video is being liberated from the monopoly distribution of broadcast television and is now being able to be moved into people's hands in a variety of ways, making it a very different video age than we've ever gone through. And just to remind everybody that this age of broadcast that really was the dominant era, the dominant construct for politics in the 20th century, began with radio. And radio, in its day, was as radical in politics as the internet is in our day. It was the first time in human history that voters were able to hear directly from their leader in real time, their actual voice of their leader in all of human history. It was really a radical change, and it created much greater intimacy, and it also created much more centralized power. I mean, I really believe that the rise of the very outsized leaders of the mid part of the 20th century, Stalin and Hitler and FDR and others who were sort of the biggest personalities and most powerful leaders of the entire 20th century, was not unconnected to this very powerful new tool that they had, which was radio, which gave them much more greater intimacy and greater reach into actual voters, going over the head of intermediaries, and giving that centralizing control in the center. Because what broadcast was about a single place broadcasting out. It was not a two-way communication. Hugely powerful new tool that day of the early 20th century. We know that broadcast didn't sit still, and broadcast evolved. And broadcast became about TV in the 60s as this media construct, starting with Kennedy-Nixon and the debates and the Daisy ad, and then we saw the social change movements of the 20th century really came into people's living rooms, bringing them closer to these movements and to this kind of politics. And really from that moment on, right, what American politics became about was about this. It was about mastering television. It was about a 30-second spot or the 8-second soundbite on the evening news. That's really what all local or national news, that's what all of politics really became about, was mastering TV. And even in 1992, in the Clinton campaign, we actually renamed GOTV to be Get on Television, right? That's how far it had gone at that point. But that media world, the 20th century, that broadcast media world, which really had four components to it, TV, newspapers, radio, and phones, is changing dramatically. It's being assaulted really by three major things. First is the rise of cable and satellite sort of breaking apart the old control of TV. Second is mobile phones, which are really going to be connecting people in a very different way. But the third way that it's breaking up, and I'm missing a slide, is really the internet, right? The internet earthquake is really transforming and pulling, breaking up this 20th century media order. And let's look what it's doing to 20th century media, right? Newspapers are in very precipitous decline, despite the very fast-growing population we have in the United States. So this is the first 6 months of 2006. Some of these numbers have continued at this point, right? We've seen, these are good newspapers losing huge amounts of market share in a very short period of time. Good news for progressives is that radio, where the conservatives have been very dominant, and we haven't updated these slides, but these numbers have continued. It's, traditional terrestrial radio is going through precipitous decline in the United States as people have other ways of accessing audio other than radio. But for the purpose of this conversation today, we're going to now drill down on the changes that are going on in the dominant media of politics and advocacy, which is television, right? And TV is really leaving this age of broadcast, moving into a very different age. Just some basic stats here is that, the first thing we always try to go through is that, in 2001, more people were watching everyday cable than broadcast in their daily viewing habits. Cable really came out of nowhere, and you've seen this precipitous decline. These numbers are a little bit old now. We do need to, but these lines have continued to go exactly along the same arc. You can see there was really not much change during this whole period. And this is interesting, right? Because when I graduated college in 1985, 90% of anybody watching television at any one moment was watching the live broadcast television networks, right? So you've seen this huge rise in cable, and you've even seen that play out in 2008. Most of the major presidential debates have been on cable networks, right? And so you've already seen it play out. But what hasn't happened is that advertising, ad spend, has not kept up with the eyeballs. And you see that what's happened is there's been a lag, right? Cable advertising has not been moving over to, has not been keeping up with where the eyeballs have been going. There's been a lag. And in the commercial advertising world in 2004, for every $4 spent on cable, there was $5 spent on broadcast. In politics in 2004, it was 18 to 1, right? Meaning that for every dollar spent on broadcast, $18 spent on broadcast, there was $1 spent on cable, which means in essence politics wasn't using cable as a medium of communication, even though there were more people watching cable than broadcast television, right? And so that ratio in 2006 in the commercial ad spend world went to 1 to 1. For every dollar spent on cable, there's a dollar spent on broadcast. In politics, it went to 10 to 1. We were responsible for a large chunk of that. I mean, we worked with a lot of the groups on the left of center side, a lot of Senate and House campaigns, a lot Move On. A lot of other groups changed their entire strategy of the way they bought ads based on our analysis in this. And you've seen a huge shift of literally hundreds of millions of dollars in ad spend from broadcast to cable, bringing that ratio down. But clearly that ratio's got a long way to go. I mean, if it's our estimate that half of all money spent, and this is very important for Emily's list, half of all money spent in political campaigns is knowingly wasted by the media consultants. So it's our estimate that half of all the money we collectively raise as partisans is knowingly wasted by the media consultants. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars every 2 years, right? So what do we know about cable, right? Well, first of all, we know that cable is more demographically, it delivers a higher value and is more targetable from a demographic standpoint. And it's also cheaper. Because in essence it's like real estate that is undervalued and it's kind of new hot property and it's still less valued than old real estate, you can see that reaching, for example, women voters through Lifetime, this is called CPM, it's cost per 1,000 viewers, reaching women voters through Lifetime is much cheaper than reaching a similar audience through the big television networks, right? So cable, first of all, allows you to target. So first of all, cable is more demographically targetable and cheaper, right? You can reach the audiences that you want to reach in much more precise ways, depending on how sophisticated your market research is, right? Electoral politics, a little bit less so for advocacy, but for electoral politics, is the geographic efficiencies. The big issue with cable is its geo-targeting capacity, which is a relatively new part of cable. I mean, cable used to be a very crude system. But let's just take, this is California 11, a congressional race that Democrats won, a congressional district that Democrats won in 2006. And this is maybe an extreme example, but it's a very good illustration, which is, this is a congressional district that lives entirely in two media markets, San Francisco and Sacramento, right? The only way to reach voters using traditional broadcast television is through these two media markets. And but this is California, right? So there's going to be some inefficiencies in that. Let's look at what it actually means in this race, right? If you're advertising in the San Francisco, if you buy San Francisco to reach this district, 90% of all the money you spend will go outside this district to voters who you're not interested in targeting. That's an incredible waste factor, right? That means for every $1 million you spend, 900,000 of that is not actually going to your target audience. Obviously, not only is it wasted, it means that the money you are spending isn't being used very efficiently. The second thing, you say, wow, that sucks. I mean, let's see what we can do with Sacramento, right? And Sacramento's even worse. It's 96% waste, right? This is not a totally atypical scenario, right? And traditionally, up until a few years ago, outside groups and campaigns would just buy, broadcast in these markets, and it would be an extraordinary inefficient way of reaching these target voters, right? I mean, in this district. Cable now allows you, through a variety of means, and we won't go into all the details today, we can in the Q&A, and it's in our paper called Buy Cable on our website, is that cable allows you now to buy much more precisely within the congressional district, meaning that you won't be able to line it up one-to-one, particularly one that's so oddly shaped as this one, right? But you're going to be able to get in 70, 80, 90% efficiency as opposed to 10% or 5% efficiency. There will still be bleed and waste. But where cable is headed is that, by 2010, 2012, you're going to be able to deliver a cable ad directly to someone's box, right? So it means that you would literally be able to know that a cable box in a house was watched by a woman and one was watched by a man in the same house, and you'd be able to send them different ads based on the demographics of the watcher of the box, right? That's where cable is headed. It's going one-to-one the way that direct mail is. So what we're seeing is this transition from broadcast, which essentially was crude and dumb, to a much more precise targeting. And there's already, in places like New York, there are experiments already going on with this one-to-one television delivery system of cable. It's already happening. This is not a hypothetical. This is not, pie in the sky. So what you know about cable in this kind of race is that not only is it way more efficient for targeting, it's also much less, it delivers much more. So we did an analysis in a neighboring district where we gave a hypothetical Republican candidate $1 million of broadcast and a hypothetical Democratic candidate $600,000 of cable. And because of the way the buy was made, that $600,000 got 9 times the impressions of the $1 million, right? I mean, this is really important. This is the difference between winning and losing a race or winning and losing an advocacy campaign. If you can deliver 9 times the impressions with 60% of the spend, right? Think about, we're really talking about very dramatic changes in the way you think about media. This is not an incremental way of rethinking media. This is now becoming much more common, I would say, in the Senate races. It's still not as common in House races and other traditional advocacy. The thing that may also upend all this, though, I'm sorry, I thought I had a couple more slides in here, is there's a slide missing here, but it's about the penetration of DVRs. The thing that's also changing television is the arrival of DVRs. It is really amazing. In 2006, only 9% of homes had digital video recording devices. 2007, it was 20%. In 2008, it's going to be probably as high as 35% of homes, which means that if you skew it to the demography, it could be as many as 50% of all voters will have the access to DVRs. And this is the study, right? 60% of those with the DVR skip all television commercials, right? Which means that the number in 2008 will be that somewhere between 25 and 35% of all voters will be skipping all television commercials, right? So even though I have argued earlier that cable is now a viable medium and allows state reps, not only is it you can use it more efficiently, but it also allows an entire category of politicians to get into the TV business that was inaccessible before. If you're a state rep or a state senator and you've got $600,000, you can now go on TV in a very meaningful way, in a way that you simply couldn't even 2 years ago because of what's happened with cable. But the thing that's also eroding cable's success and return is this. And no one really knows what to do. We had this remarkable presentation by the head of audience research at TiVo at our last forum just a couple of weeks ago, which you can watch online if you'd like. And his numbers were stunning in terms of just, they've done a lot of analysis in which ads get skipped and which don't, and that, because not all ads get skipped. The important thing is movie ads don't get skipped. Pharmaceutical ads for pharmaceutical products don't get skipped. I mean, there's a lot of audience research, but we are now operating in an environment where a third of all television commercials, a third of all viewers who own a television are skipping all television commercials, right? Up from virtually nothing in 2004. So what this means, and when you aggregate all this, is that when I graduated college, 90% of anybody watching a television, right, was watching live broadcast TV. In 2008, it's going to be about a third of anybody watching a television at a moment will be watching live broadcast television. And essentially, in the progressive movement, that's where all of our advertising dollars go. It's the most inane, and frankly, it's such an outmoded way of thinking about this medium that it's potentially very dangerous. So our basic premise here, and the argument we've been making, has been to buy cable. Right? But that argument is also evolving as we're now dealing with the incredibly rapid adoption of DVRs, which is something that is happening at a much faster rate. Every time there's a new prediction, it's actually happening faster. It's moving quicker through it because, as you may know, the cable companies themselves, right, are including DVRs in their cable boxes now, right? So it's the cable companies that are actually providing these DVRs. TiVo actually has a very small market share of DVRs. It's really now coming about through Comcast and Time Warner. And through the satellite dishes. And so we're really seeing a rapid adoption. So what it means is, for those of us in the progressive advocacy business, in whatever place we are in, we really are going to have to be experimenting a lot with how we move video into the marketplace. There are many more options. Video is being liberated from monopoly distribution and broadcast. But also some of the ways that video is being moved is happening outside of the advertising space, right? TiVo, you know, or is advertising in a very different way. So we have a lot of learning to do. And if people are executing media campaigns the way they were executing even in 2006, I would argue that it's bordering on malpractice. If they're doing it the way they're doing it in 2004, they shouldn't actually be in the political advocacy business, because things have changed so much. So one of the recommendations we make, and there's somebody here who advises candidates in an aggressive way, is that we have a checklist of things that people should be asking their media consultants, the candidates should be asking, to make sure that they're doing, and that's something we can talk about a little bit more. But thank you very much for everybody coming today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about this. It's something I have great, as a former television producer and writer in my earlier life, I have a lot of passion about this subject, and I do believe that NDN and MPI have been instrumental in helping progressives really understand this opportunity of cable and the bigger reality of how television itself is really going through a profound transformation. So thanks, everybody.